Well, hello. My name is Pastor Andy. Good to be with you whenever you happen to be tuning in to this May 30th message. Recording this to you as opposed to kind of a typical live stream worship service, because this weekend we have our outdoor worship service. And so if you weren't able to join us for that, wanted to share with you this message. That way you could continue in this new series that we're going to be kicking off, and you can follow along with the message as we continue on from wherever you happen to be. Hope that you had a good Memorial Day weekend, wherever it is you're gathering together to remember those who have given their lives for us and our freedoms here in America. Hopefully you've had a good time to reflect and be thankful for those men and women and their families who've done that, and also give thanks to God for all that He has blessed us with. Again, I'm Pastor Andy. Good to be with you whenever you have to be tuning in and watching this. Before we dive into the message this morning or this evening, whenever you happen to be watching it, a couple announcements I'm going to share with you, things I want you to make sure you're aware of for us here at Peace Ann Arbor. First of all, we have a women's event coming up in just one more week, June 5th. That Saturday morning, we have a women's event from 10 a.m. to noon. So ladies, it will be an awesome time for you to gather together, be outside, have some great simple yoga experiences, but it's for all experience levels of yoga, but also a time to connect, a time to enjoy some good and tasty and healthy food and refreshments, and just have a good time to get some rest and refreshment. So that's on June 5th. There's a sign up below in the link in this YouTube video. Secondly, we have a men's event the following Saturday on June 12th. We have a men's cookout and also a cornhole tournament. So all the guys, we encourage you to come, invite a friend, invite a family member. We'd love to see you guys come out and join us June 12th at 5 p.m. And again, there's a sign up below just so we get a head count so we can know how many people are coming. And we'd love to see you there. And then lastly, we have youth events kicking off all throughout the summer. Pretty much every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, we will have youth group or youth events on those Sundays starting June 6th for 6th grade through 12th grade. So any student entering 6th grade through 12th grade will have Sunday evening or Sunday during the day activities. Again, there's a link in the description that gives you the schedule and also gives you ways that you can sign up and be a part of those events for the youth in your life or the ones that you are aware of. So take note of all those different events that are coming up just around the pike, and we would love for you to join us for that, and we'll love to have you continue to stay engaged with us as the summer begins. So that's all the announcements I have for you this morning or evening or afternoon. And so now I invite you, if you have a Bible with you, whether it's a hard copy, if you've got it pulled up on a tab or you have it on your phone, we're going to be turning to Mark chapter 4, starting at verse 1. I'm going to go ahead and read our scripture reading, which comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 1 through 9. And so I'm going to read this for you, and then we will dive in to the message that we have for today. Mark begins, Mark 4, chapter 4, verse 1. Again, Jesus began to teach beside the sea, and a very large crowd gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat in it on the sea. And the whole crowd was beside the sea on the land, and he was teaching them many things in parables. And in his teaching he said to them, Listen, behold, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured it. Other seed fell on the rocky ground, where it did not have much soil, and immediately it sprang up, since it had no depth of soil. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and since it had no root, it withered away. Other seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and yielded no grain. And other seeds fell into good soil and produced grain, growing up and increasing and yielding 30-fold and 60-fold and 100-fold. And Jesus said, He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So today, this weekend, we are kicking off a new short series entitled The Parables of Jesus. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at some of these parables that Jesus told and reflecting upon them and applying them to our lives. And you may be wondering, okay, what exactly is a parable? I've heard that word before, and maybe you've heard them from the Bible, but what exactly is a parable? Well, this was a common way that Jesus would teach his disciples. And if you read through the Gospels, the 4 biographies of Jesus, you'll notice a handful of them, a number of them that he uses as a teaching tool. And to give you kind of a simple summary, a simple definition of what a parable is simply this. It's a made-up story to teach us truth. It is a made-up story to teach us truth. And it's important to recognize those 2 key pieces in there, that parables were stories that didn't literally happen. Jesus would kind of explain a scenario or a situation or describe things, and everybody understood, okay, this is a story. This isn't something that literally happened. Yet even though it didn't literally happen, there's truth in it. There's something true and factual and lasting that Jesus is communicating through this story. And so what he would do is he would teach these parables to crowds, to his disciples, to religious leaders, to all types of people, and he wanted to teach them truth. But not just generic truth, but truth about a few things in particular. Truth about himself, who he was, what his mission was all about. Truth about God's kingdom. Truth about who God is. But also truth about us. So giving us kind of this reflection and this ability to look truthfully at who we are and what we do and what drives us and all of these things. And so Jesus would use these parables to teach us these things. And that's what we have in Mark chapter 4. We have in Mark chapter 4 what's known as the parable of the sower. And we just heard it a few seconds ago, but just to give you a quick, again, summary of Jesus getting into a boat. He has this large crowd in front of him, and he gets on this boat and begins to teach, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to learn from him and hear from him. He was just beginning his ministry, and they were wanting to know, what is this guy all about? And so Jesus gets on this boat and kind of stands up so that all of this crowd can hear him, and he starts by just simply going into this story and says, hey, so this is what my kingdom is like. It's like a sower who takes seed, and he's going around, and he throws seed on some path. And some birds came and ate it. So he goes on to the next plot of land, and he throws it down, and this time it's rocky soil. And it couldn't get its roots down deep because all the rocks were there. So it sprouted, it grew, but when the sun came out, scorched it, plant died. So sower goes on to the next spot, throws some seed down, and this time there's weeds all around it. And as the grain starts growing, the weeds are growing as well, and they started sucking away the life of the grain. So much so that they zapped it of its life, and it withered and died because of the weeds. And then lastly, the sower goes to some good soil, and he throws it down in the good soil, and it got down deep, and its roots got in there, and it grew up, and it grew so much, it was more than anybody would have expected to. It grew exponentially. And then Jesus says, let whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. And he drops the microphone and he walks away. So do you get what he's saying? Do you have ears to hear? I imagine as we hear that for the first time, there's some questions that come up. There's some confusion, like, okay, what are you talking about, Jesus? What's going on here? What do you mean by that, Jesus? And that's the brilliance of parables. And when Jesus would teach in parables, he does it in a sense to initially confuse us. But he confuses us so that we begin to ask questions. So we begin to look deeper. We begin to pause and reflect and dig into, so why am I confused? What are you talking about? What does this mean? And as we dig and dive and pause, then he begins to reveal and teach us truth. And I would say in this parable in particular, Mark 4, this parable of the sower, Jesus has 3 words to give us. He has an encouraging word to give us, he has a challenging word to give us, and he has a graceful word. So Jesus in this parable has an encouraging word, a challenging word, and a graceful word. Let's first talk about this encouraging word and what Jesus means in this parable. So when Jesus would teach in parables, he would use these made-up stories, and there would be characters, there would be situations, there would be items, there would be things in the parable. And what they meant is they would be they would be representing something in real life. And part of the process of understanding parables is pausing and saying, okay, what does this person, or what does this situation, what does this action, what does this item, what do they represent in the world around us? What do they stand in for? And Jesus does this all the time and wants us to pause and reflect and say, okay, what do these things mean? So when he mentions these soils or the sower or the seed, what do all those things mean? And this can be where the tricky part of parables comes in, because a lot of times we have to kind of process it and interpret it and kind of pause and think about it for ourselves and asking questions. And sometimes there aren't super easy answers. But fortunately, in Mark chapter 4, we get the answers directly from Jesus. You see, just after he told this parable and he walked away, his closest disciples followed him and they said, okay, Jesus, we're really confused. Can you kind of unpack that for us? Can you tell us what you mean by that? And then Jesus unpacks it for them in some of the following verses in Mark chapter 4, and he explains what all of the different pieces mean. And so he begins and says, listen, the sower represents God. And that's who the sower represents. And the seed that the sower is sowing represents his word. But more specifically, this word about Jesus, this word of his gospel, this word that he is God in flesh, that he has come to redeem and to save and to rescue all of creation. He says that's the word. Sower is God, the seed is his word, this word about Jesus and what he's come to do. And then these different types of soil, these 4 different types that are mentioned, represent different people. Specifically, different people and how they respond to this message, how they respond to this word about Jesus. And so Jesus unpacks each of the soils. Then he says, okay, so the first one, this hard, rocky, or not rocky, but hard path, this represents the person who the word comes to them and they don't even receive it. Like there's no give at all. Kind of like when you throw something on the ground and it just sits on top of it. It doesn't get into the soil. It doesn't get into the ground at all. It just stays on the top. And Jesus says, that's like the person who hears about me, who hears the good news about what I've come to do for them, and they're like, I want nothing to do with it. It's the person who, when they hear any talk about religion or spirituality, they simply just stiff-arm it completely. And maybe you know somebody like that in your life. And then Jesus moves on to the second soil. He says, okay, the second soil that was kind of the rocky soil, this is the person who hears about me, who hears my word, they believe it. They say, yes, I trust in you, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. But they keep their faith at a very superficial level. And that kind of represents the rocks because it couldn't get the roots down deep. And this is the person that just keeps their faith at a surface level. They say, hey, I'll follow you, Jesus, for the good stuff, but all these other things that you mentioned about, like, denying myself or serving others or giving sacrificially or putting other people ahead of me or any host of other kind of hard teachings of Jesus or things that make us uncomfortable or that infringe upon our comfortability. It's the person who says, no, I don't want any of that stuff. I'll just take the good stuff with Jesus, but all this other stuff, I'll just kind of pick and choose. And Jesus says that's like a person whose roots haven't gone down deep because it's crowded out by the rocks. And he says what happens is the sun comes up, representing hardships, representing difficulties in life, representing pain. And what happens is because the faith hasn't got any roots, it simply withers under the heat, and it dies. And then Jesus moves on to the third soil and says, this is the soil that is planted, that grows, but it also recognizes there's a bunch of weeds around it. And these weeds, they start to choke out the life of this plant. And what this represents is the person who believes Jesus, who hears his word and receives it, but they allow the cares of the world to take higher priority. They allow the concerns of money, of success, of having the most stuff, of being viewed a certain way by the world around us. Whatever other thing in this world, they put the things of this world ahead of the things of God. And he says when you do that, what happens is the things of the world begin to choke you out. And you may not even realize it's happening, but what it's doing is cutting off your faith. So much so that eventually the faith is simply killed, drowned out, choked out by the things of the world. And then lastly, Jesus says, but then the good soil is the person who hears my word and believes it and puts it into action, and they let their roots grow down deep. They dig in. They carve away the rocks, and they let the roots grow down deep so they can sustain the hardships and the suffering and the pain and the loss of this life, and their faith remains strong because it's rooted. And also they kind of carve out the place from weeds, and they recognize the priority that they need, that God's things are above the things of this world, no matter how good they are. God takes priority in our life, and so their faith is nourished and sustained. And he says that through that person, their faith, the work of me in their life, in them and through them, is more than they can possibly imagine. And Jesus outlines all these things and says, that's what it means. And I mention this as an encouraging word because remember, he's talking to his disciples. And this is at the beginning of his ministry, of when he's about to start telling people about who he is. So they're about to, to keep with the parable, sow the seed. The sower is about to go and begin his work of sowing this seed. And he is asking his disciples to go with him, to join him in his work of sowing this message, of spreading this seed, of speaking to others about who Jesus is and about his goodness. They're about to join him in that, and Jesus wants them to be prepared. He wants them to be kind of eyes wide open and kind of understanding, listen, you got to know this, that when you go and you start telling people about who I am and you start sowing this seed, there's going to be all different types of reactions. There's going to be some of the hard, rocky path, the path that doesn't give and they just give you the stiff arm. There's going to be the rocky soil that they're going to believe, but eventually they're not going to dig down deep enough. And sometimes you're going to share this word with people and they're going to believe, but then you're going to see in them that they're going to put other things ahead of me. And you're going to see all of these different things. But then you're also going to see people who hear this word and believe it, and it gets down deep, and it's going to be beautiful and amazing when you see that. And he wants to share that with them so that they are encouraged. And they know, listen, your job isn't to figure out what type of soil somebody else is. Your job isn't to dictate to them how they need to respond. Your job is simply this: sow the seed. Your job is simple, to sow the seed, to speak to others about who I am, to share this goodness, this mercy, this grace that I have. That's what you're simply called to do, and to leave the rest up to me. Because it can get discouraging when you go and you sow the seed and you share your faith, you talk about Jesus, you want them to know how much he loves them, and it can get discouraging to see maybe stiff arm, stiff arm, stiff arm, or people believe it, but then you see them walk away slowly but surely. But Jesus wants you to be encouraged, because our mission is the same, to join him in sowing this seed. And he wants you to know and you to be encouraged. Listen, your job is simply to be sowers of the seed and to join me in that work. But don't think that it's your job to force somebody to respond a certain way. Simply sow the seed and leave the rest up to me. And he wants you to be encouraged by that. But more than this encouraging word, Jesus also has a challenging word for us. He has an encouraging word in that it's our job simply to be faithful and sow the seed, but this challenging word comes to us as well. You see, because when we think about this parable and we hear it, one of the questions I think that will naturally come up, and you may have already had it when you first heard it, is simply this, like, okay, so there's different types of soils, these different types of people. What type of soil am I? Like, that's a natural question to ask when you hear this, is what type of soil am I? And Jesus actually wants us to ask that question, because when we ask that question, what we begin to do is kind of do a spiritual audit. It's kind of similar to kind of the IRS audit, which is never fun if you've ever had it. It's never fun because what it does is it looks at painstakingly detail of what you spent money on, what money came in, and to make sure everything is lined up and everything is in its proper place, because it doesn't lie. The audit doesn't lie. Because you can say one thing, but when you actually look at a greater detail, that actually reveals the truth of things. And Jesus, he's inviting us to do the same thing with ourselves. To kind of take a spiritual audit of our life and ask ourselves, okay, so if I were to look at these different reactions, like, what best describes where I'm at right now? I think this is an important question for us, because I think that now that we're, God willing, and hopefully on the other side of the pandemic, we're at least kind of on the back end of it, of this pandemic experience that the world and you and I have been in these past year or number of months. I think what this pandemic has done is it's begun to bring to the surface and expose what type of soil we are. Now, we may have said one thing 16 months ago, but through this experience of the pandemic, it's begun to expose what type of soil we are. And the reality is, we may not like the answer that we see. And as we think about this and we look at these different reactions of the path, the rocky soil, the weeds, or the good soil, we may think to ourselves, like, man, like, I want to be the good soil. I want to be that, but if I'm honest with myself, I've allowed the cares of this world to matter more than God. And I've allowed the weeds to grow up. Or I recognize that I haven't carved out the rocks. I haven't let my roots grow down deep and sustain me and shelter me and encourage me and give me a solid foundation in my faith, so when the sun comes up, my faith has begun to wither. Or maybe even we're in a spot where our faith has become so hardened that it's become like that path that doesn't receive the goodness that God is giving to us. But here's the beautiful thing about God. The beautiful thing about God is that He offers this reality that even though we may feel like we're in one of those types of soil, He says, listen, you don't have to stay there. I can make you into good soil. That's actually my promise. That's my invitation to you, that even though it's challenging when we kind of do this audit of ourselves, God says, I can transform you. I can make you into good soil. But we first need to recognize that we're not there. And to turn to Him and say, God, come and turn me into that good soil. Come work your way and transform me into that, because that's what God does. God is like a tiller as well. God comes and He can till the soil. And I'm not a farmer, but I at least know this, that when you want crops to grow, when you want plants to grow, one of the things that you usually have to do is you got to till the soil. You got to prepare the soil to make it good, to make it receptive. And God does the same thing for us, is that he can till the soil of our hearts and our souls so that we receive his word well. And he promises to do that in two specific ways. He says that he will till the soil of our hearts and souls in two specific ways. He will till the soil of our hearts through his word and through his people. That's his promise, that he will till the soil in our hearts and our souls and make us into good soil through his word and through his people. He does it through his word by confronting us with his demands, with what he calls of us, and it breaks us down, and we realize, and this is what you've called me to, but I fall short so often. But in the same breath, he meets us with his promises and says, yes, you haven't met it, but I have. And Jesus has done it perfectly for you so that you are forgiven and redeemed. And as we engage in that word, as we read it and submerge ourselves in it, he transforms us. And he grows this faith. He tills the soil as we engage his word. But he also does it through his people. Through his people, as we gather together in worship, as we sit alongside one another and sing his praises and receive his body and blood, as we gather together in small groups, whether for Bible study or for fun stuff, and we just do life together. We open up about our struggles and our joys, and we share that with others, and they share their hopes and their struggles with us, and we begin to walk with one another. And God says this, that if you want to know where I do my transformative work in your life, you got to be submersed in my word and surrounded by my people. And he says, that's where I do my work. That's where I till the soil and I take you from this rocky or weed-filled soil and I make you into good soil that receives and believes my word. Now, I mentioned this, and I have to also include this, that there's a temptation, though, in all of us, and I'm tempted by it too. That even though we know that to be true, that he transforms us and tills the soil of our hearts and souls through his word and through his people, there's a temptation to downplay one or both of them. And we all feel it. I feel it. And I'm a pastor, but I'm with you. We're tempted to downplay his word, and we're tempted to downplay his people. I think we downplay his word when we think to ourselves, like, man, like I've been in church most of my life. I've heard the Bible stories. I went through confirmation. I passed the test. I know all the facts. If you gave me a quiz, I could probably answer most of them right. I listen to the sermon from you from time to time, Pastor Andy. I get all I need. I don't need to kind of read this and memorize it and do that on a regular basis on my own. I get all that I need from my past or from the sermon. But we're downplaying God's word. And we're shifting away the focus from ourselves submersing in his word. But we also downplay his people when we kind of look at this gathering together, whether in worship or in events or in groups together, where we gather together with one another from our church, and we downplay it and we say, man, we're just really busy right now. Like, we're in a really busy season of life. And I know I've said that, and I know I feel that, but here's what I want to say. Never in my life have I heard someone, or even me myself thought it, that I've ever been to a spot where we're like, we've now reached our unbusy portion of life. No, I feel like all of our life is the busy season of life, but we say that and we kind of push away the gathering together and the meeting of God's people. Or we say, listen, that's just not my cup of tea. I don't really like people. Like, I like my family and my close friends, but gathering together with other people, like, that's not my thing. I'm introverted, or whatever the case is, or church people kind of weird me out, and so I'm good with just me and Jesus. Or even now, in our day and age, we say, listen, we've got live stream, and it's really convenient just to be able to tune in, and we get the word that way, and we can kind of stay as a household and kind of worship that way. it's way more convenient than getting up and coming into church, whatever that may be. And I'll say this, that when it comes to live stream specifically, I'm very thankful for it, especially in this pandemic. It's a very great gift of God, and the ability to sow his seed in all of these incredible ways, more than we could possibly fathom, to more people than we could imagine. It's an incredible opportunity. But when we turn live stream into the place that we stay, and again, not for health reasons, not for that's putting that aside, but when we say it's convenient for us and we're going to stay in this live stream and not gather together with the people of God. And that's when we're using it not in the way it's intended. That's like when someone invites you over for dinner and you guys hang out in the entryway and you talk, but you never make your way over to the dinner table, and then you look at the time, you're like, all right, we'll see you later. Can it work to connect that way? Sure, it can. You connect and you get to know people a little bit, but you're missing out on the deeper beauty, the deeper reality when you get to sit at the table, surround yourself with others. So we downplay God's word and we downplay God's people. And I mention this not to bring guilt on us, but rather to say, listen, Jesus wants us to be aware that if we downplay his word and downplay his people, that's dangerous ground to be on. Because when we do that, over time, the weeds begin to grow and begin to choke out the faith in us because we're not submersed in his word or surrounded with his people. Or the rocks begin to form around us and we can't get our roots down deep enough. Or eventually over time, the hardness of our heart, the hardness of our faith gets to a point where the things of God we kind of give a stiff arm to again and again and again. And Jesus invites us, no, let me do my work in you. Let me till the soil in you. Engage my word and surround yourself with my people and watch what I will do. That's the invitation he has for us. But it's a challenging word. But lastly, and this is what I want to leave you with, is lastly, Jesus, he gives us the encouraging word, a challenging word, but he also gives us an incredibly gracious word. And here's what I mean. We all have an image of God in our minds. We all have an image of what he looks like, of what he comes to do. We all have an image of God. And oftentimes, it's a wrong image. We think of God as this angry judge who simply wants to punish us when we do something wrong. Or we think of God as like this distant, aloof old man who is uncaring and uninvolved in the things of this world, or any other image that you can come to mind. But what is the image that you have of who God is? And what Jesus wants to do in this parable is he wants us to have a certain image of God. And he wants us to have this image of this sower, which, if you just think about it, this guy is kind of weird. He's weird in the sense that this sower is sowing the seed, which in that day and age, like, that's his income. Like, if you're a farmer, like, the seed is what you do to grow crops, and the crops is what you sell to make money. So it's very important that you are wise and you are making good decisions about where you sow the seed. But where do we see this sower sowing seed? On the pathway that gets walked on and that birds eat from. In rocky soil that he knows is going to have a hard time growing roots. He throws it among the weeds that are going to take away its nutrients and choke it. But he does also throw it in the good soil. But here's what he does. He is like indiscriminatory of where he sows his seed. He seems to be pretty wasteful with his seed. And that's the image Jesus wants us to have of God. That he is so abundant in his seed that we could say, man, you're pretty wasteful with it. But wasteful in the good sense. Wasteful in the sense that he never gives up. Wasteful in the sense that he continues to shower his message, his word of grace and forgiveness and life, even in places that we would look at and be like, why are you doing that? It's pointless. But but not to God. Because God can transform any soil into good soil. And so he says, I'm going to sow my seed because I want all people to know they are loved and know they are forgiven, and he will never stop. And so even if you're sitting here and reflecting, man, I know I'm not that good soil, here's the good news. Here's the gracious word Jesus has for you. He has not given up on you, and he will not give up on you. And his grace and his forgiveness, his love will continue to be poured out on you. And he invites you to receive it. He invites you to receive it and to say, yes, I know your love is for me, and I want to trust it and believe it. So God, do your work and till the soil of my life. Make me into that good soil. But the gracious word is, no matter who you are, Jesus is for you. Jesus' love and forgiveness and mercy is for you. So friends, as you reflect upon this parable, yes, it's challenging, but it's also encouraging. Above all, I pray that as you let God do his work in you through his word and through his people, engage in those ways. And as you seek to share this good news with others, may you above all know that God is gracious, and he will continue to be gracious and merciful and loving to you. May God bless you this day. May God bless your weekend, your day off, and may God bless you this upcoming week. Amen.